On a cool autumn evening in 1982, as rain relentlessly battered the aging streets of Kansas City, I found myself drawn to a derelict mansion at the end of Sycamore Lane. The neighborhood, once vibrant, had become a landscape of whispers and wary glances, a place where even the wind seemed to murmur secrets of a tragedy too terrible to speak aloud. According to old newspaper clippings and hushed conversations in dimly lit diners, the home had witnessed the brutal massacre of the Diamond family, a crime so shocking it had left an indelible scar on the community. Now the abandoned mansion stood as a grim monument to that wretched night. I, Michael Donovan, was a struggling journalist with a penchant for uncovering the truth behind the concealed horror. My interest in the Diamond case was both professional and personal. Rumors had long suggested that the house was not empty, that on certain stormy nights, the grieving voices of those lost could be heard echoing through the halls. Drawn by a desire to confront the darkness head-on, I set out into the storm with little more than a flashlight, a stack of fragile newspaper clippings, and an insatiable yearning for answers. As I approached the iron gate, rusted and hanging precariously on its hinges, the wind picked up, carrying with it the distant sound of a child's laughter. It was a sound that sent a shiver coursing through my veins. The gate creaked open as if welcoming me into a realm where time had frayed at the edges, and I hesitated only for a moment before stepping into the shadow of the forgotten. The towering mansion loomed against a slate sky, its front marred by peeling paint and shattered windows. Each step along the weed-choked path led me closer to an unknown verdict. The front door beckoned with the same ominous magnetism that any condemned soul might feel when standing on the precipice of their fate. I pushed the heavy door open. It swung inward with a groan, revealing a foyer thick with dust and the pungent odor of decay. Inside, every surface bore the scars of abandonment. Faded wallpaper depicted happier times, a family portrait of hope juxtaposed against the current desolation. My flashlight beam skittered nervously across the floorboards, illuminating cracks that snaked like veins beneath layers of neglect. In one small study, the scattered remnants of lives abruptly ended. A child's drawing, its innocent lines now eerily contorted into a grim, spectral helix. Riddled diaries with entries halting mid-sentence, and tattered photographs that captured the final smiles of the Diamond family before darkness fell. A sudden, almost imperceptible sound guided me to a doorway at the end of a narrow corridor. There, the remnants of a parlor whispered of past revelries. I discovered an old record player layered with dust from disuse, its needle suspended over the groove of a long-forgotten melody. I couldn't help but imagine that at any moment the relic might burst to life, playing the lament of shattered lives, a lullaby for the damned. With each step deeper into the mansion, the oppressive chill within the walls seemed to intensify, and an unsettling sensation of being watched crept along my skin. I paused in what had once been the master bedroom, a vast room dominated by a decaying four-poster bed draped in cobwebs. It was here that the faded diary lay open on a dressing table. The entries, trembling with hurried script, recounted the events of that unavoidable night. In halting phrases, a note detailed the gradual descent into terror. Strange knocks at midnight, sudden bursts of frigid air, and the miserable faces of unseen watchers. The final entry ended with a single resigned line, "They have come for us all." It was then that I first heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, as if small, tentative fingers were drumming against the wooden door. I swung around with my flashlight held high, my heart clattering in my chest. Nothing. Yet the tapping persisted, insistent, echoing from somewhere beyond my vision. As I edged toward the sound, each thud of my pulse blended with the spectral rhythm. Shadows in the corners of the room began to shift, elongating and contracting with the flickering light, as if trying to form faces contorted with sorrow and fury. A sudden sight chilled me to the bone. In a mirror hanging crooked on the wall, I caught a glimpse of a little girl, translucent and sorrowful, her eyes deep pools of grief. Her lips parted in a silent plea, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. Before I could react, she vanished into the murk of the room, leaving nothing but an echo of desperation behind her. The experience was too visceral, too raw to be a mere trick of imagination. The mansion's haunted legacy had awakened. With my senses straining to reconcile the swirling images, I pressed on, compelled by a morbid urgency. The hallway beyond the parlor was lined with portraits of the Diamond family, each visage haunted by its own expression of despair. Among them, one portrait stood out, a man with eyes like dark coals, set in an expression neither fully human nor entirely spectral. It was as if his gaze carried the weight of an unspoken accusation and a promise of retribution. In that moment, a guttural voice reverberated from the walls, a low murmur that seemed to rise from the very foundation of the house. "You must know," it intoned, each syllable a dirge. "Understand the curse." The sound vibrated through my bones, awakening memories I had no right to possess. I found myself recalling details from old police reports, the brutal, inexplicable slaying of the Diamond family, which had left investigators baffled and a community shattered. Although no culprit was ever apprehended, rumors swirled of a sinister presence that had seeped into the fabric of the home, a darkness that defied explanation. Driven by both dread and a desperate thirst for truth, I ventured into the basement, a place described in the diary as the heart of the nightmare. The descent was steep, each step a journey toward an incubator of memories best left undisturbed. The narrow stairway, lit only by the trembling beam of my flashlight, looked as though it had been carved out by sorrow and despair. At its base, the basement was a cavern of obscurity, filled with relics of a past and the overpowering stench of rot and regret. There, amidst rusty tools and shattered furniture, lay a series of personal effects, a ring, a locket, and an old photograph of a young woman whose eyes brimmed with both anguish and warning. I recognized the photograph from the dim clippings. It was the image of Eleanor Diamond, the heartbroken mother whose final moments had been marred by unspeakable horror. The significance of these objects was impossible to ignore. They were tokens of a life violently interrupted, manifestations of grief that refused to fade. Then came a sudden, heart-stopping moment. The temperature plummeted, and the darkness around me grew almost tangible, as if an unseen presence was drawing near. I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, out of sync with my own nervous pace. One by one, the spectral figures materialized. A pale, stooped man whose hollow eyes burned with a ravenous intensity. A spectral child with a vacant stare, suspended in time, and a sorrowful woman clinging to the vestiges of a once happy smile. They drifted toward me, their faces etched with the agony of a past that would not rest. "Why are you here?" the child whispered, her voice both innocent and accusatory. I need to know," I stammered, my throat dry as dust. "Who did this? What unleashed such evil?" As if in answer, the figures converged into a single, shifting mass of anguished memories, and the spectral man, his eyes now gleaming with a malevolent light, stepped forward. "It is not merely our tale," he intoned. "The darkness of Sycamore Lane is a living curse, And you have come to share its burden. A force beyond human comprehension pulsed in that declaration. My mind reeled as I tried to understand how the guilty and the damned could be entwined in such an eternal vendetta. The room spun into a vortex of images, the final moments of the Diamond family, a violent intrusion from some unknown force, a revelation that each spectral form was not simply a ghost, but a shard of a malignant legacy that had seeped into the very soil of the house. In a frantic bid to escape, I raced back up the narrow stairs, each footfall echoing the relentless beating of a doomed heart. Yet the mansion itself had awakened, a sentient, grieving creature determined to keep its secrets locked away. The corridors shifted as if in mocking defiance of reason, leading me in circles. The iron gate at the entrance, which had once swung open with reluctant invitation, now stood barricaded by an unseen force. I reached for my hand trembling, violently, only to feel them brush against a puddle of something chillingly familiar. It was a patch of blood, uncannily fresh despite the long years that had passed. My pulse hammered a frantic cadence as I realized that the darkness had grown hungry, feeding on my terror, drawing me ever deeper into its cold embrace. In the mirror of one of the corridors, a final truth manifested before my eyes. I saw not only my terrified face, but also a spectral overlay, a dark doppelganger whose eyes mirrored those of the unknown man in the portrait. The realization struck me like a thunderclap. The curse might not be confined to the dead. It was a successor that could claim any soul who dared to pry too deeply into the past. I was now tethered to the tragic cycle of Sycamore Lane. The walls began to close in as disembodied voices, a cacophony of grief and rage, surged back at me. "You must atone," they chanted in a relentless drone. Every step I took, every desperate cry for mercy, only seemed to intensify the spectral chorus. The house was alive with a malignant force. The restless spirits of the Demon family, and perhaps even the darkened soul of the one forever linked to their demise. I collapsed against a wall in the heart of the intricate corridors as the overwhelming presence made itself indisputable. In that unbearable moment, with the flickering light of my failing flashlight casting strange patterns on the cold stone, I knew there was no escape. The mansion, this cursed relic of a bloody past, had claimed me as its final penance. The truth of Sycamore Lane was sealed in the silent agreement between the living and its tortured dead. Some secrets were meant to be buried, and some sins were destined to resurface, trapping the curious in their endless cycle of despair. Dawn crept reluctantly over Kansas City, its light a fragile barrier against the night's terrors. The mansion stood silent once more, but decaying sentinel to the unspeakable events that had taken place within its walls. Neighbors would later whisper about strange noises and a peculiar cold that lingered in the air, as though the house itself mourned the lives it had claimed. A local reporter, intrigued by the night's mysterious events, arrived to find only the faded remnants of a once mighty home. There was no sign of me, Michael Donovan, only the trace of a struggle and inexplicable splatters of fresh blood where none should be. In the ensuing investigation, the Diamond murders remained officially unsolved, and the mansion on Sycamore Lane was abandoned once again, its dark secrets locked away in recesses where even time dared not venture. Yet, on stormy nights when the wind howls through the empty streets of Kansas City, some still say you can hear whispered laments from within the walls of that dilapidated house. A chilling reminder that the past is never truly dead. It lingers, waiting silently for the next unsuspecting seeker to disturb the delicate balance between life and eternal shadow. Real-life events have a way of etching themselves into the collective memory of a place. The tragedy on Sycamore Lane, though buried in dusty archives and disputed accounts, serves as a potent reminder of the thin line between history and horror. For every unsolved case, for every dark secret whispered by ancient walls, there exists a terror that refuses to fade into darkness. The corridors of history are long and twisted. For every door opened, 100 more remain closed, hiding secrets too horrifying to imagine. The darkness is patient. It waits for those brave enough, perhaps foolish enough, to look beyond the veneer of the everyday. And once you've seen what lies beneath, you may never be the same again.